podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Welcome to the Nuggets podcast. I'm your host, David Sammel, and each week we'll be discussing a topic that will provide you with food for thought to help you on your journey. Welcome to my podcast, and today is a little bit different. I'm here to inform you that I'm going to rebrand the podcast, and the new name is going to be Locker Room Power Podcast. And the reason for this is I wrote a best-selling book called Locker Room Power many years ago, and upgraded it fairly recently. And it just seems to be more in keeping with what I'm trying to do. And so, David Sammel, rather than having another thing, David Sammel Nuggets, I'm going to have the Locker Room Power podcast. I've got the Locker Room Power book. And then I have Mindset College, which is my online coaching courses, which many of them go together with private coaching as well. So I'm a tour coach. I have online courses. I have the Locker Room Power book, and this is now going to be the Locker Room Power podcast. David Sammel Nuggets, started off originally, as you know, for me to leave a legacy for my grandsons and to kind of know how I thought about things. But after, over 180 episodes now, I feel like I'm going in a slightly different direction. It's growing in popularity, and I'm now interviewing people, and these are longer podcasts. And in between, I will be still giving nuggets, and feel that the Locker Room Power podcast name is more in keeping with the longer form interviews that I'm doing with interesting people. And as I've said before, the most interesting people is everybody. Everybody has a story. Everybody has something that they've done in their lives that are very, very interesting to most people who are listening. And so I encourage you, if you would like to be interviewed and then in turn interview me, please get in touch. The last few interviews have gone down extremely well. I'm not just purely interviewing, well-known people in my network. I'm trying to really paint the picture of the incredible amount of interesting stories that anybody has to give. And we can all learn from each other. And I think I personally would love to learn from as many different people as possible, and in as many different fields of work that they do, or the different types of lives that they have. And that's what's always fascinated me, that in an instance, we can change our lives. We can move abroad. We can quit a job, we can start a business. There are infinite possibilities in how we can change our lives. And of course, with responsibility means that, change needs to be thought about very, very carefully. But I do believe that if you feel trapped, you need to think really outside the box as to how you can change the way you operate, and whether a change of jobs or a change of country or a change of state would really help you, or is it internally that something needs to change for you to feel happier? And only we can judge that for ourselves. And if anything, experience has told me that most people really and truthfully know the answers for themselves. nobody knows us better than we know ourselves. And of course, we all have blind spots. And I think that's why it's really good to have a coach or a therapist or a counselor who you can bounce ideas off of. And once you start to talk things through, it's amazing how answers can come to you just by talking it through even with a friend. But if you get a trained coach or mentor or counselor, they definitely can ask you, the right questions to get you to the answers that you might not realize that you have internally. And I think it's so much more meaningful and powerful if we find answers for ourselves, those internal answers that are already there. And it's just the blockage of being in our own heads and not being able to see the information from a bird's eye view, which you can start to see if you talk things through with someone else. So if you're feeling stuck in your life, the first step, as I'd say, is, have a little chat with yourself, see if you don't know internally what the answer is. If there's, if you're not sure and there's nothing really coming to mind, then talk it through with a friend and, explore options. And, a good question they can ask you is, what are the options that you have? And when you start to think about the options that you have, and don't be restricted by responsibility. First, write down or record all the different options that you have, and then start to look at them and start to see what is feasible and what is not feasible. Is there time delay before something's feasible or not? So overall, I'm making a change now. I'm making a change to this podcast. Is it going to work? Is it going to be better? Are people going to like the change, not like the change? Who knows? But the fact is, change means you need to just get on with it, make the change, and see what happens. And what's the worst thing that can happen? The show goes down in popularity. But at the end of the day, I can only do what I believe is right at any point in time. And I'm also a very big believer that decisions can be made and they can always be reversed. Anyway, thank you very much, and just think about change in your life, and remember, from this week onwards, you'll see some rebranding, and slowly but surely the podcast will be known as the Locker Room Power Podcast. Thank you. That wraps up this episode. Be sure to grab the freebie in the show notes, a guide to the difference between belief and confidence. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts and subscribe on YouTube for more. See you in the next episode.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.